I am a 51 years old male, and I have 3 children, 1 girl, 1 boy, and 1 child is gender neutral. My son Eric is the oldest, Eva is the middle child, and Charlie is my youngest. I'm still very new to the whole LGBTQ thing, so please correct me if I say something wrong. Now sadly, when the children were all young, their mother / my wife passed away in a car accident, and I've been raising them by myself ever since, as I've chosen to never remarry since my wife was / is the love of my life. I'll say I'm definitely not a perfect father, but I've done the best I could to raise my children. Now Eva has always been a bit more wild than her other siblings even before her mother's passing. I've tried everything, ranging from having sit-down talks with her to putting her in therapy, as well as taking parenting classes and reading books to see what I could possibly do to help. Therapy did seem to help a little bit, but decided to stop soon after she turned 18. Now let me tell you the story as to why I'm here now. My daughter Eva still lives with me and Charlie as she goes to school, and has definitely been home more due to the pandemic, but has started to go out more now that they are letting up on some of the regulations. Now I was out getting dinner with an old high school buddy of mine when I get a panicked call from my son, who had been at my house hanging out with his siblings. To summarize what he told me, he got into an argument with Eva and Charlie sided with him. Eva became very volatile and even called Charlie a slur, which is a big hell no for me. So I headed home and tried to calm everything down. I told Eva I didn't care about what they had been arguing about, and that she wasn't allowed to disrespect Charlie or Eric like that. Me and Eva ended up now being the ones to start arguing, but I soon shut it down when I realized it wasn't gonna help. I forced her to apologize and took away her car privileges until she could learn to respect her siblings, and I thought it was the end of that. Well, the next morning after work I ended up coming home and finding scraps of papers all over. At first I didn't get it, but then soon found out that she cut up about half a dozen letters her mother had written me when I was much younger. I was livid. I know it was her because I have a couple cameras in my house. I just walked into her room and told her to get out. She was smug and rolled her eyes, but then I yelled, "Get the out of my house," and she realized I was serious. She was crying and screaming, but I had felt sorta numb at that point, and she left with a friend of hers. But now I feel like I was being too harsh, but I wanna stand my ground. She did know about the cameras, but they're really just there for my dog. My son is almost 17. This Christmas we bought him an expensive computer gaming chair, as he plays a lot of online multiplayer shooters. My son has some anger issues, which he's currently in therapy for, and these shooters tend to bring out his temper more than normal. However, for the past few months he's been keeping it together well, so I figured the chair might be a fair present. I was wrong, because the day after Christmas he was gaming, started to have bad luck. He was losing his patience. This culminated in him screaming insults and then picking up his chair and slamming it into the ground, breaking the back of it. After talking him down, we had a very serious conversation about him no longer being allowed to play multiplayer games while under my roof until his therapist feels comfortable with his progress, talked about coping mechanisms, etc. However, I made it very clear this was unacceptable and he would be grounded. We've had these heart-to-hearts many times, so it's not like every time he has an outburst I'm making light of it. It's a serious issue and treated like such. However, when he came to me later that day and told me he'd like me to replace the chair because it was a gift, he really liked it and it would only be fair, the frustration, disbelief and disappointment in his behavior boiled over, and I started laughing hysterically. As in a full laughing fit, barely able to breathe or talk. The more he'd plead his case, the harder I'd laugh, repeatedly asking him how it was fair in his mind to have me replace a gift I paid for that he broke in anger. This obviously pissed him off more, which led to him getting emotional, but I just couldn't seem to stop myself. I tried walking out of the room and asking him to drop it, but every time he'd say, "But I need a chair," or "What am I supposed to do now?" I'd laugh again. I tried explaining that I'm not laughing at his feelings. I'm laughing at how absurd it is for him as a teenager to expect me to replace he can't be bothered to treat with respect, and then whine about it when he broke it. He's still pissed about it, and feels slighted. I feel bad for laughing, and honestly wonder if I had some sort of mini stress break myself. Because it's never happened before and I couldn't seem to stop. But at the same time, I stand by the fact that his request was ridiculous enough to make most people want to laugh. My husband Derek and I have been married for 3 years, together for 7 total. Several years ago, about 6 now, I guess, I worked closely with a male coworker, Paul, that Derek was never fond of. Paul and I never had an inappropriate relationship. Derek's jealousy wasn't completely out of nowhere. I get why he felt that way. Those couple years were a perfect storm of relationship stress. I was working long hours. We were living apart after trying and failing to move in together. Our relationship was still fairly new. And then you add in a handsome coworker I had to spend long hours with and saw more than my boyfriend at the time. Paul was the source of several fights. Again, we never did anything that wasn't completely kosher. Eventually I told Derek he needed to trust me and get over it, or we were going to have to break up. He said he would stop worrying, and for the most part things were good. When Paul transferred out of state a few months later, things were really good. There were no worries at all, and our relationship has been amazingly strong ever since. This last weekend, my husband went out with a couple friends to some bars and a football game. When he came home, he was pretty wasted. We talked for a bit, and he mentioned how a friend of his had told him that he broke up with his girlfriend because she cheated on him. I commented on how that was a bummer and good for him for finding out before they got too serious. Derek, however, had a different take on it. He said it was a shame because they had seemed like a good couple, and if they really loved each other his friend could move past the cheating. Just like he had with me. At first I thought my husband was admitting to cheating on me, and asked him what he meant. He told me he always knew that Paul and I had slept together at least once all those years ago. But he knew I was the one for him and forgave me. I told Derek that I had never so much as even hugged Paul, except maybe at his going away party, let alone slept with him. Derek sort of just patted me on the arm, said of course, and passed out. The next morning I asked him about the conversation and he said it was okay, he had forgiven me, it wasn't even an issue. I again stressed that I had never cheated on him with anybody and I needed him to believe me. He sort of did the same, of course you didn't, babe wink thing again, and went to work. Every time I've tried to talk to him since, he won't hear me out. I'm this close to losing it with him. I need him to know that I never cheated, and I'm hurt that he thinks I would do something like that. What do I do? Do I just let him have this since it's not really hurting anything, or what? I don't want my own husband to think so little of me that he thinks I would cheat. That's not who I am. Tim and I met in an English literature class our junior year of college, and we've been together the 10 years since. While he ended up going into IT, I stayed in the liberal arts track and ended up doing non-profit work after college when I realized I didn't actually want to be a school teacher. Just to say that we always assumed he'd out-earn me by a considerable margin. Though when he made more I always insisted we split things evenly to avoid potential resentment down the road. I've had sort of a non-linear career path, but ended up switching to the corporate world. To make a long story short, my liberal arts degree and time doing non-profit work gave me a lot of skills that enable me to really excel professionally in some more niche areas. I recently started a new job as a consultant, making way more than I'd ever anticipated. When I got the offer, I told Tim that the pay was amazing, but he didn't ask about the actual amount and I didn't want to be braggy about it. Especially since I was fairly sure it was above his current income. Well, we just put in an application for a new place. And in the process of having to submit our pay stubs it's become obvious that I make roughly 30% more than he does now. I expected him to think that was cool, since he's a feminist and has always been super supportive of my career. But instead he started to make increasingly harsh jabs about how I cheated the system to get where I am. That no English lit major makes more than a cybersecurity professional without cheating somehow. His major point is that I got my first job out of nepotism, which set me up to trample more qualified people who didn't have the same advantages. It's true that I got my first post-college job after being referred by a sorority sister. But it was for non-profit work making $22K //year, not exactly at somebody's daddy's firm. He also points out that at my first corporate job, I snagged a big promotion after volunteering to take on starting up the company's diversity //equity //inclusion program, and I'll admit that were I a white man, It's highly unlikely I would have been able to be the face of the eventually high-profile diversity program. Tim also notes that I was awarded a small college scholarship for being a promising female writer, when no such scholarship existed for males. But all that said, I still don't feel like I cheated the system, and it makes me angry to listen to him joke about it. Especially since I grew up blue-collar and worked full-time while going to school full-time to afford my degree. I reached a breaking point yesterday when he made a crack about how the new / first woman on his team is an obvious diversity hire. I told him that his jokes about women cheating the system to get ahead aren't funny or guy talk ribbing, as he says. They make him sound like an insecure little boy. He told me I was being a naive Karen and we haven't really talked since yesterday.